Contrary to popular belief, I did not start my YouTube channel in December 2008. It actually started out far earlier than that, even before YouTube existed. This is the camcorder I first started with, this cheap RCA shoulder VHS camcorder. But even if you flip it around, you can see, hey look, this is where the logo started off for my channel. Like, it's been around significantly longer. What we would do, me and my friends, is that I would record like jackass like stunts, skateboarding stuff, you know, things that like 13 and 14-year-olds would record on a camcorder if they had around. And then we would go and I would use something like this very cheesy Dazzle USB capture pod. I mean, it didn't matter about the quality at the time because most of us were still using dial-up or very slow ADSL. And we would just kind of upload those online wherever we could. There was actually a YouTube channel later on which had a bunch of these neat, weird videos. That channel's long since been closed down, so unfortunately all the footage from that era has been lost. But when I was recording video with this back then, I wanted something better. I wanted something that I simply could not afford. A nice high-end camera. High 8 camcorders at this time were coming down in price because mini DV was starting to be introduced quite aggressively into the market. I didn't have any comprehension of what mini DV was at the time, so I never actually thought that through in my head that maybe there is a better camera I could have gotten. Instead, I wanted a nice high 8 camcorder. And, well, there's a couple of options you can go with. From Sony, there was the CCDV 5000, but Canon had a camera which looked very similar in color theming here with the black and the ivory beige on it. And that was the Canon L1 and the L2 series, which both came out in 1991 and I think 1992 or 1993. So by the time I was interested in them, they were already 10 years old and they were coming down in price, but they were still very expensive. There was still a prosumer section of the universe that was willing to pay several $100s for a camera and a lens. And again, me with the paper route, I wasn't going to be able to afford that. But I kept that in the back of my mind for many years. Like, every so often I go look up the prices and say, you know what, it's getting better, but not right now. And once I started really doing YouTube videos, the relevancy of high 8 was completely obsolete. I could get a mini DV camera that could just do circles around it. And then finally COVID came around and I was able to say, you know what? I think now is finally time to buy myself a nice Canon camcorder. And so I did. And I ended up buying a very nice kit Canon L2 setup. It was $400 Canadian. That's $350 and $50 shipping. It was a smashing good deal for what you're about to see today. Now, I made an unboxing video for that, and what happened is we ran into technical issues. This was actually April or May 2020. We finally converted over to HD a few months later. So those technical issues mean that all the footage that was recorded that day isn't usable at all for a YouTube video. As I reach for my handy dandy box cutting knife here, just gonna give it a, by the way, this thing is oddly packaged. And then not long after that, Cathode Ray Dude did his video where he was talking about the L1, which really is the same thing as the L2, and I'll explain that later. And I just looked at the case that I had gotten and just put it into storage and said, you know what, if I don't play with it now, it'll still be a surprise for me later. Well, it's December 2023 when I make this video. I'm finally going to open that case up and we're going to look through it all, and I'll tell you more about what I got with this camera. This Pelican case here, I'm pretty sure, is $150 out of the $350 I paid for this camera. All value-added stuff. This is an amazing Pelican case. And what's inside of it is what really I find to be absolutely astounding. The best high 8 camcorder you can probably get your hands on. This is a nearly complete Canon L2 kit. Foam-lined, padded, with all of the accessories in excellent condition. This is the camera for many, many years I had been trying to get my hands on. And it's wonderful. I love it. It's great to finally have it in my hands, even though it smells like fish. We're going to get to that one in a little bit. So if you haven't seen the video from Cathode Ray Dude, he does describe and criticize that the Canon L2 is weird in its form factor, and that's primarily why I like it. There are buttons encrusted on just about every conceivable location on this camera. And that does mean, yes, it can be cumbersome at times to reach some of these controls, but Canon has made an attempt. For example, for the playback controls, everything is here in front of your grip. You even have a record button here. You also have a way to put your hand in like this, and your record button is right here. Your battery is actually part of your hand grip. This buddy right here. Unfortunately, this one's dead. So that one's going to snap in like that, and now you have a nice, proper camcorder handle. You can, of course, still hold it like a typical SLR or DSLR if you wish, and the idea is that when you are holding the lens on this side here, don't worry, we'll put lenses onto this, you also still now have access to all of these additional controls which are available not only to control the camera, but also to control the functions that are going to be on the lenses. Behind this little door here, by the way, you do have your video input and your outputs, your Land-C remote control. This camera has everything. That is also the differentiating thing between the Canon L1 and the Canon L2. The L2 adds slight improvements to audio and video, but it also adds time code. Why do you want time code? For something very important we'll get to in a little bit. Now, obviously, I've already pointed out there is no lenses attached to this right now. What Canon was trying to do with this is standardize a brand new type of lens mount. They already had their own EOS EF mount. There was the older FD mount, and there was a couple other mounts that were used by other manufacturers and other standards, bayonet mounts, for example. This here uses what is called the VL, or video lens mount. It was a standard that was brought together by a consortium of Sony, Panasonic, Canon, obviously, of interchangeable lenses that could then be used between multiple cameras. It also allowed you to use different types of lenses on the camcorder, so you weren't necessarily limited to any one lens built into the camcorder. And back in the 80s and 90s, that was the thing. You just got a camcorder, the lens was in there, you were just happy with what came with it. So Canon went away and made themselves a full range of lenses and then said, here's my selection of lenses. Hey Sony, what did you make? And Sony was just like, we didn't make anything for this. We did our own standard. Panasonic, what did you make? Yeah, sorry, we didn't do anything either. We just, we did our own thing. So ultimately, it was kind of unsuccessful right out of the gate, where Canon made a whole bunch of nice lenses for this camera, and really the lenses only work with this, so it now just seems like a neat party trick where you can interchange the lenses. The lenses, however, are still very, very good. Remember, this is Canon we're talking about. So normally you would get yourself a kit lens like this. This here is a 5 to 15 millimeter interchangeable VL lens. It's got good Canon glass on it, I can assure you that, but it also, it's metal. So what that means is that, much like you expect with Canon's other very high-end professional lenses in photography, this is a very high-end lens that uses a proprietary mount that nobody else uses. There's not even a C mount available for this. You can't convert this to any other larger format image sensor, because then you get vignetting or whatever, you get that black ring that goes around when you have the wrong lens put onto a image sensor that's too large. This lens here, so what you do, take the dust cap off. It is an intelligent lens, by the way, so it is powered, and that'll come in very handy here later. Take the cap off the end, much like any other camera, 2 red marks, put it on, twist it, there you go. Now it's still fairly small, but like I mentioned, you can keep one hand here while holding the grip, and then you can also still get access to your zoom control, your manual focus if you so wish it, and as well as all your other controls. Releasing the lens, one button, off it comes like that. This here also supplies 3 times macro. Almost all these lenses I'm about to show you today use 3 times macro. The other lens that you'd get that's also pretty kit is this one right here. This is an 8 to 120 millimeter lens. Again, this is all metal, rubber grips right there, VL. Take it off, snap it on. Now we're starting to get something that looks really impressive. And again, you have full access to your zoom control. I can just kind of reach with my finger here the focus control, and I still have myself the ability to use the electronic zoom either from here or from this control located on the back of the camera as well. But we can go even better when it comes to these lenses here. So now I've shown you a fairly wide lens, and I've also shown you a fairly nice telephoto lens. Let's go even more into telephoto. This buddy right here is a 200mm reflex lens. It does have focus, but it's not zoom. It also comes with this really nice ring here. Take the cap off, and again, put that on the front of the camera. Boom, 200mm in your hand. And we started off with, what, 5mm? So we're doing incredibly good here right now. Pop that off there, and we're finally going to move on to the next lens. Now, let's keep in mind here, when you bought a Canon L2 new, it cost you between $2,700 and $3,500, depending on which vendor you went through and how many you bought in quantity. That's very expensive. These here were very premium lenses, but there's one more super premium lens, and it's a very fancy feature that's built onto it as well because it's also very exotic. It was a $1,500 lens, VL mount, so also proprietary to this camera. And that, buddy, is right here. This is a, I gotta read this up, a 10 to 100mm optically image stabilized telephoto lens. This thing is a monster. And this is why you also have more regarding that intelligent camera mount there, because I can put that in there. I push this button. This unlocks the optical image stabilization. And now you have a serious piece of camera performance right here. You can walk around, it'll stabilize it. It's really not all that bad. In all, everything I'm showing you here, just with the camera body and these lenses, this is like $7,000, almost $8,000. And we're still not done yet here with what's inside this box. Obviously, you need to have a microphone because this doesn't have a microphone built into it. There's also 2 shoes available here. So you have one for, say, a light or some other accessory, plus the one up here. And I could just simply thread this nice powered stereo microphone on here, the Canon MM200, and I have a 3.5 and a 2.5. I do, by the way, have volume controls that are hiding just down in here, plus an attenuation of 20 dB if I want to have that. It looks even better. Like, this is a great camera. This is the kind of thing that you would just drool over as like a videographer or someone who just did like documentaries. Like, it's a really nice camera. What else, however, do we have in here now that we've gone through all the lenses? Well, we can ignore the AC adapter and its battery eliminator because, well, we already know what that does. We can also look at the full-sized remote control that this comes with here. So it does have a jog wheel at the bottom, but it has all the other typical controls that you would expect both for the tape transport and the lens. You can do zoom from this as well. We also have buried in here the Canon ZR100. This is a LAN-C compatible controller that plugs into the port on the side in here. So if I not juggle it, I can just plug it in like that there. And the idea is that when you had this on a tripod, you could put this out to the handle, and then you had control over it from a distance as well. I'm just going to throw that off to the side as well. Lens hoods, those obviously make sense. You can see the rubber on these ones are starting to get a little bit weird. They're not sticky, it's just doing that white powdery thing that you usually expect with it. Normally cleans off quite well. And then we come down to our other more mundane accessories, such as this little guy here in the leather case, which is the VL mount 2x telephoto extender. All it does, one side and the other side, snaps in between, and as a result, increases the zoom on some of your lenses. A very cheap but very effective way of getting a better and longer range lens without having to pay for a much larger lens. Interestingly, this also came with a brand new Canon branded 2CR5 lithium battery. It has never leaked. Likewise, I want to point out this is not the battery that goes in this camera. There is one other accessory in here that came with it kind of as a last-ditch offer here, because I guess it had been available for a while and no one had bought the camera, and so they threw it in for me. And that is in this little pouch right here. This is the Canon EOS VL adapter. So you have this beautiful selection of lenses right here. And now you have the ability to take EF mount EOS lenses from your SLR or your digital SLR and use them on this camcorder. It is worth pointing out that when you use this adapter, you are going to have to go at a penalty to every lens that you attach onto it. All of these VL lenses are ground to a specification specifically for VL mount cameras. The lens that you're going to be putting on here from, say, a DSLR is going to be different, and as a result, you're going to get a zoom on anything that you attach to this of about 2 times. So a 100mm lens becomes 200mm. 200 becomes 400. You get the idea. It's just a crop factor you're going to get, but at the same time, you're now using the center of the glass, which is usually the most precise point of any piece of lens. So you're also going to be getting the clearest picture that's also possibly available. But this battery here has a little compartment that pops away. The 2CR5 pops inside of that. So now that we have emptied out the Pelican case, the camcorder kit of my dreams, seriously, this is amazing to have this all sitting on the table finally. Really, what was the demographic for this camera? Like, I can go into issues here of popular electronics, and I can find people who were saying very positive things about this camera. Like, it's great, but it's still like a $3,000 camera. It's incredibly expensive. It has these proprietary lenses. Who really cared about this when you had so many more options that were available that were just as good? Well, I found 2 different markets that were more than satisfied with what the L1 and the L2 would deliver. One of which time would provide a very, very useful moment in history to which these really made sense. The first market that I can find are animal and bird watchers. These are people who will spend rather amazing amounts of money for cameras, primarily because, well, when you want to look at a starling, you got to be able to look at it from quite a distance away. So you'll get yourself a rather nice camera, I want to point out. Mind you, at this point here, it's going to be film, and you're going to get for it also a very nice lens. In this example here, I have a Canon EOS 55 with a 24-105mm lens on it. Like, this one here is a $700 lens I bought. But we're talking about lenses that would be going 250, 500, 1,000mm. Very expensive lenses from Canon or Nikon. You get the idea. For the sake of this video, we're just going to say Canon. But if you wanted to use something for the camcorder, well, I mean, this is kind of your option here. This is, and I have to look up the model number on this one here, the UCS-1A. It's like a fully automatic high-8 stereo camcorder. Most of the controls here are automatic. You can't really switch between other automatic modes. Okay, there is a focus ring, so there's a semi-automatic focus control on it. But when it comes to lenses, you only have one, and that's built into the camera itself. Not really all that usable when you're trying to look at birds that are maybe 1,000 feet away. On the other hand, you did have prosumer range cameras that Canon had at the same time. The A1, for example. So it should come as no surprise that, of course, I own a Canon A1 as well. This thing actually showed up after I bought the L2, so a little irritated, but it allows me to do a very quick comparison here against the prosumer line that Canon had and the blurred line of professionalism that the Canon L1 and the L2 were giving you. When you look at the A1, it is very, very, very similar to what you got in the L1 and the L2. All of the controls are in the same place. The viewfinders are identical. Even the one shoe on the top here is in the same place. Beyond that, however, things begin to change. Beyond its high 8, this obviously is going to lack proper timecode. you now have an internal microphone and the volume adjustment has moved down here, or the sensitivity adjustment for the microphone has actually moved down here. And also, obviously, you don't have a removable lens anymore. You have a single fixed lens, which is, okay, it's good enough. And as a result, you do have some controls which have slid down from their various nooks and crannies up here and back down to the side of the camera where we would typically expect them. But the handle grip is otherwise entirely the same. What has also moved around is that, as we remember on the L1 and the L2, the handle grip also makes up for the battery. And if I unclip the battery here, which is, there we go, the battery on this is interchangeable with the A1. But on the A1, the battery is actually living completely underneath the camera. So you don't have to deal with a handle grip that's also making up as double duty for also holding the battery. Then you have the L1 and later the L2, which, like I've mentioned before, have removable lenses. So I'm just going to pop this lens off here for the moment. Remember, let's say that you have yourself a nice and expensive film camera with a nice and expensive 1000mm lens. This is not a 1000mm lens. Now, these photographers and videographers can take your EOS adapter, take that super expensive lens they have, and then they could just snap it right onto the front of their camcorder. And now remember how we had that crop factor that was being applied, that like by default zoom that you're going to get when using these EOS lenses on VL mount cameras? That means that that 1000mm lens is now a 2000mm, $5,000 lens, presumably, attached to the front of your very expensive camcorder. You are going to get excellent pictures from a film-grade lens on high 8, mind you, but a lot of people didn't care. You could get that kind of options with video, and no other camcorder really was providing these kinds of abilities at the time. So people were just satisfied. They would happily pay that kind of money considering it gave them such a good picture. The other market had no reason to be messing with the L1, the L2, or high 8 at all. In professional broadcast, you really don't want to use high 8. I mean, it is a good format. Let's not get that wrong. Prosumers could use it and it wasn't a problem. Professionally, however, really wasn't ideal. Remember, at this time here, you would have the likes of Betacam and Betacam SP. This was the professional standard. Maybe you could get away with SVHS, but for the most part, if you were going to spend money and have a good picture, you were going to use one of these formats. Every editing suite was set up for it, every outfit was able to handle it, and it could do separated colors if you so desired. I believe it's actually part of the Betacam standard. You can probably go look it up. I think Technology Connections did a video on it recently. The cameras, however, that use these formats are not, on the other hand, cheap. So I'm going to slide this out of the way here and just reach down and grab myself one of these cameras. Now, keep in mind, this here is an SVHS camera, but a Betacam camera is going to look exactly the same. This is the JVC GYX2. It is a professional television camera. So what you're looking at for the body here, we're going to completely ignore the lens here. You're looking at anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 for the body. That's crazy, but that's money that you were going to have to spend for a professional. Even today, that's still the case. You want a professional camera, you're going to have to pay professional prices. The lens will cost you somewhere around $5,000. So let's say, in all, right here, sitting on the table from 1993, the same period as the L2, this is a $15,000 camera. These cameras are heavy. They can be cumbersome at times. They're very delicate also. You drop them and it's going to be very expensive to fix. And what happened in the early 90s? Well, with the fall of the Soviet Union, you had the remainders of the Soviet states, which were beginning to go into a bit of a battle. You know, we had the Balkans, we had Bosnia, we had stuff like that. You needed to get reporters out into the field. And these are really not great field cameras in that regard. They're big, they're cumbersome, they're shoulder cams, and just, I mean, you got to get it done regardless. So here's your professional camera, here you go. Even if you as a reporter or journalist or cameraman didn't want to be hauling this damn thing halfway across Europe. There was another incident that also happened in the early 90s. There was a man by the name of Saddam Hussein. There was the Kuwait War. There was Operation Desert Storm. There was all sorts of unrest that was taking place in Libya, Iraq. That whole area there in the Middle East was all sorts of chaos. And the major networks needed to get the latest news out. Now, you could go with one of these cameras here. You could go out there, and it gives a stunning and stellar picture. You could do whatever you were recording, you'd go back to your hotel room, you'd do the editing, and then you would beam it back off to master control, and they would send it off to editing so they could get that either up and running live or up in the next couple of minutes after editing was done with it. That satellite beaming back in the 90s wasn't necessarily stellar. I mean, you could get really high quality satellite live feeds, but for the most part, they weren't going to be doing that. You were going to lose some of the quality. At which point you began to look at Betacam SP and say, was this really worth my time to lug this all the way out there? The other is that it's very hot in the Middle East, and it's also really annoying to have to carry around a giant camera like this. And again, like I said, these are very expensive to maintain and repair, and you don't want to drop them. And when you're in the middle of a war zone, there will be times where these are going to be rough handled. And then what are you going to do? It's just not ideal. Also, it's huge. You have this on your shoulder. It looks like some sort of rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Okay, so I had some really neat footage that I was going to show you here in the video, but it got content matched, so unfortunately I had to remove it. What it showed was the scene from TLC back in the 90s, so it had to have been from Bosnia or something like that, where from one angle from another building you can see a guy leaning around the corner with an RPG and he shoots off one rocket. And then they switch to another one where it shows a cameraman at the same corner, and this time he has a camera like over his shoulder. And remember, the lens is also where your handle grip is as well, and it gets blown out of his hands because there's a sniper that shoots at him thinking it's an RPG. Anyways, back to the video. They wanted something smaller, and there was something smaller, and it's sitting here on the table. Not necessarily the L2 in this case, but the Canon L1s were quite well loved by reporters and journalists in the 90s because it's such a small camera. You could go out there and it didn't matter if the quality wasn't all that great. High 8 was good enough for that live satellite broadcast and that transmission to master control of late breaking, here's what's happening down in the streets kind of stuff, and you could get away with it. That's fine. The other is simply cost. $15,000 for one camera and lens. Or we look at this, and where we say $3,000 plus $1,500, you can buy 3 of these camera kits for the price of one professional camera. A reporter didn't need to feel paranoid that the network was going to go after them for trashing their camera. A cameraman could just swing this camera around if they did also desired. And that wasn't a problem. And they were honestly a little bit more durable as well. And they had those excellent Canon optics, so that wasn't necessarily a problem at all with having inferior like 90s camcorder quality. This was a good camera and it was well loved. And because of that well, I can't confirm that consumer-wise these were not very well selling because of their price. Commercially, especially in volume purchases directly from distributors, these cameras apparently sold very well. So that's why there's so many of them that are showing up in liquidation and why there's so many of them that are still showing up for sale today. The addition of the L2 having enhanced timecode, however, also made this much more preferable for professional work and video editing. I have one such example here, but I also have another one in the other room. This here is the Sony CVD-1000. It is the computer video deck. It is a high 8 tape transport with almost minimal controls, though if you really do want a remote control, there is a remote control for it. You wouldn't be using the infrared remote with this. So if we flip this around, we can see we have our standard audio and video inputs and outputs. We have a connection here for mono RF modulation should you want it, but we also have 2 other connections here as well called Visca. And if that looks very similar to the serial ports that Macs at the time were using, that's because it's the exact same format. You see, what you could do at that time for several $1,000s, I want to point out here, is you could get yourself, say, a Quadra 700 and a Radius Video Vision Studio and an FWB SCSI jackhammer and an external FWB Sledgehammer SCSI disc array. And then you would have a system that was not only fast enough to capture full frame 30 frames per second video, but also high quality audio. And then with a software package like Avid Video Shop, which I guess is in the lower end but is compatible with Visca, you could record your footage on this camera. You would now have it on tape. You can pop that tape into the front of the tape deck, start up the video editing program of your choice. You can stream the video off of the tape, either in clips or in full, onto that nice disc array, and then you can do offline editing, and then you can then chop that up as you wish and export it either as multimedia back off to the internet, the server, or something like that, or you could export it again into a higher quality format such as Betacam. Okay, now that I've dumped on you a whole bunch of testimonials from other people who have used these cameras, and as a result I've challenged saying this is not commercially unsuccessful, this was a fairly popular product of its time, why am I not going to demonstrate this camera to you? Well, it's for the exact same reason that I can't even do a comparison with this, which was on the market at the exact same time. This is the Sony CCD V5000. It is a shoulder Hi8 camera. PCM audio recording is available on this. It even has little analog volume dials. This is a cool camera, but it still doesn't hold a candle up to the L2. But all of these are from the 90s. And from those folks here who like to work with old electronics, we know that capacitors in the 90s weren't necessarily all that great. So these all are malfunctioning because they need their capacitors replaced, or because they're leaking and they're causing all sorts of chaos, thus the malfunctions that are occurring. This here will not ingest a tape, much less turn on. With the L2, it'll turn on, but it won't take a tape. It just gives an alert. And as I'm waving my hands around like this, the only thing you'll see on the screen is just like a gray screen with a set of horizontal bars where there's light blowouts occurring. So that needs to be serviced as well. And on the V5000, it's just lost all video sync, so that's no good as well. Now, I could recap this myself, but I absolutely hate taking apart camcorders and recapping them. Even for the JVC GY-X2 that I demonstrated earlier, that has over 300 capacitors in it. That is an insane number of capacitors to change. You'll be sitting at your bench tediously changing those caps for days. It is a lot of work. Even for the L2, this has around 150 capacitors on random little boards scattered all over the place, and they all need to be changed. Even this here has 100 capacitors inside of it that need to be changed in order for it to be used. But my priority here really is the L2. I don't mind in this case here paying a little bit of extra money to have someone else do it. Fellow YouTube creator 12V Vids has done a couple of camcorders in the past, and so I asked him. And he said absolutely not. He hates camcorders. Getting camcorders back together is a whole challenge on its own. Having the camcorders work reliably after the recap, that's a whole other thing as well, as he's never really had a whole hell of a lot of luck on them. So he would rather not have money waved at him. No offense to him, I understand what you're getting to here. He would rather not just have money paid to him to have this high-end camcorder recapped. So I am currently looking for someone else who would be able to help me out here, and I understand that a couple $100 in labor is totally justified in this situation. That is why also I do not recommend you buy this camera. Don't buy a Canon L1 or a Canon L2 as is, even if it comes with a full kit. Unless you're willing to pay someone a pile of money, it is going to be nothing but a maintenance and upkeep nightmare as the capacitors fail on them and it gets worse, it eats tapes, or just simply it doesn't work. Now, if you are still determined to get one of these cameras because of its fancy interchangeable lenses, all of the accessories, its weird styling, and because it is a really nice high-end camera from the high 8 era, expect to pay upwards of $700, mainly because you're paying for the labor charge of having it completely recapped and serviced. That's just the way it is. As things get older, we're going to run into this a whole lot more. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I am very happy that I finally own an L2. Mwah! This is the machine that I say is absolutely perfect. This is a camera, if you really want one after I've warned you all this, it's worth getting. And it looks great. And I'm sure at any sort of event or party, or even as a movie prop, it looks like a really nice camera. But that's all for this video. And until next time, have a good one.